right, well, thank you everyone for either being here in person or on Zoom. Yeah, I'm really happy to have Maribeth Boelts here tonight. We were at an event initially at a UNI bookstore, just happened to kind of have tables next to us, and I hadn't realized there was someone in town that published like so many children's books, and over 40 children's books, some of which are for sale tonight, including Kai and the Bees, A Bike Like Sergio's, and the P.S. Brothers. And anyways, so it'd be great to hear. And I think you were the first children's book author that we've had in this series. So I think this will be, and I'm thrilled that she's going to be able to do some stuff with the with some images that I think should work on Zoom. Fingers crossed. Should be talking for 20-30 minutes, and then we will have some time for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, please hold them or think about them, and then we'll come back to you at the end. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming out, and again, join me in welcoming Maribeth Boelts.
Thanks, Jim. I'm really honored to be here tonight. I just love this warm, supportive community of writers and readers, and I thank you for the invitation. So I want to start with just take a moment to think about your favorite children's book growing up. What was it that resonated with you? What was it that made you reread it? Or put yourself in the main character's shoes, or act it out, or take on a character's British accent, or pretend that maybe like your lethargic dachshund was actually a seeing eye dog, or in my case, worry that your stomach ache when you were a little kid was actually fever and ague from the scary chapter in the Little House in the Big Woods, you know, where they all got sick. So the book that I loved growing up so much was this one, My Side of the Mountain, the unrealistic but somehow utterly believable story of a boy who at 12 years old leaves his home in New York City to live off the land in the Catskill Mountains. He makes a cozy home within the trunk of a huge hemlock tree, and he proceeds to figure out how to gather food, sew clothes out of a deer hide, and train a falcon named Frightful to hunt for him. It is almost entirely implausible, and its ending has his parents just telling him to come home, which he does, which seems really anticlimactic and super disappointing. But I love the book, and I've spent my life looking for a tree trunk big enough to live in. So that's a praying mantis, as my granddaughter would be praying mantis. So it was this intense curiosity that drove me to write for children starting 30 years ago. And it's been curiosity that has kept me writing for them. And curiosity can be a fragile thing. I read a study about having to do with curiosity where researchers offered hospitalized children a toy from home or a toy they had never seen before. And invariably, the children in the hospital chose the toy from home to play with. 6 months later, the researchers came back to the children's homes and offered them the same thing, a familiar toy or something new, and they would choose the new toy. So the obvious but important takeaway, we're more curious when we aren't overly stressed or undergoing trauma or lying in a hospital bed. And as a society and at a personal level, these are really trying times for curiosity. And they've been trying times for children too. But I think like folks gathering for Final Thursday and sharing what they've been curious enough to write about acts as an antidote, and it just matters so much, I think even more so now. So what makes the writing of a children's book so interesting? Well, first, it's the intended audience. Children are just infinitely fascinating. Their emotions are as complex, just as variable, and just as intense as adults. Their interests are wildly varied, their personalities individually specific, their peccadillos and preferences, fears and foibles uniquely their own. I think we all know this, but it's certainly more comfortable to think of children's feelings as somehow kind of diluted versions of our own, less complex, less complicated, softer around their edges. and to assume that more or less all 6-year-olds are reasonably the same. But I think if we're going to write for children, it's really critical that we challenge these notions. Otherwise, we end up making too many assumptions about their age and stage, and we risk writing stories that talk down to them or feel good for them, which a kid can sniff out a million miles away. None of us like to be pigeonholed, children included. And then this is a truth too. The world that children inhabit is the same world that we all do. And so for children, the world can be dark and senseless and sometimes cruel, but also exquisite, full of wonders all at once. So if we want to write for children, we've got to kindle the fire of curiosity. Watch a kid with an open mind or heart, see what makes them laugh. It can be more sophisticated than you would think, or way more base. I think we remember when you were a kid and you felt understood by an adult or an author, and you really conjure the times in your childhood that scared you to death, or made you worried, or tucked in and safe. So you think about love and when you felt it most deeply as a little kid, or when you experienced its heartbreaking absence. I kissed my granddaughter, Della, a few weeks ago, and I just felt this wave as I told her she was my precious pearl. She felt it too. This little unabashed affection, and she wrapped her arms around my neck. And what made this simple moment extraordinary, I'm really not sure at all, but it was real. And now the big challenge is try to wrap words around it, and that's the challenge. I subscribe to Mr. Rogers' sentiment about this. Anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know we're not alone. I love that. So that brings us back to books and why children look for stories that bring comfort, adventure, humor, a guiding light, a life unlike their own, a mystery, something familiar, or something utterly unfamiliar. They like a satisfying, it doesn't have to be happy, ending, a real set of characters, a true feeling friendship, and a story that leaves a character dancing perilously close to the edge, but doesn't necessarily cast them to their death below. They want a story that moves, that hooks them, and doesn't spend all the time on talk. They want to laugh, cry, feel, relate to a character, and they want to laugh. Did I already say that? With these thoughts in mind, I'd like to begin and tell you a little bit about my books and my process. So we're going to start with the master here. Oops. Right here. Beverly Clary. Back up in just a second. So Beverly Clary was the master who started it all for me. And this beloved book, The Mouse and the Motorcycle. So I was in 2nd grade and I was reading this book and I'm like, I loved it. And then all of a sudden I just like looked at the cover and I saw her name. And I'm like, that is a real human being. That is a person who had this great idea to write about a mouse and a motorcycle. And that's what I want to do when I grow up. I just knew it. And so a few years ago, I decided to write Beverly Clary a letter, and I told her that if she was my neighbor, I'd bring her a bouquet and a pie. And she wrote me back and she said, appreciation is so much better than a pie or a bouquet. So that's just a treasure to me. And she just died. I think she was 104 when she died. So anyway, so my family. This is my family that I grew up in. My 3 brothers are the reason I am who I am today. That's seen there. Many of my ideas for my books have come straight from my family, both the wild one I grew up in and my immediate family that includes 4 exquisite grandchildren. I also write a lot about dogs. Between kids and dogs, I've got a score full of potential ideas. So ideas for me come from, there's my Beverly Clary. Yeah. But ideas for me come from writing about what I know, remember, and imagine. But we also write about what we want to find out. And we write in response to the ideas that somehow crash through the heavens and land in our laps, asking for our attention. I like the notion of taking stock of what is in our hand as a potential wellspring of ideas. We just study our ordinary days, our questions, our memories, our struggles, and the things that make us laugh and feel and tick and wonder, and we write about them. This sounds so dang basic, even as the words come out of my mouth, but in writing for children, we've all been children, and our experience of being a child, if we manage the horsemen of sentimentality and nostalgia. Those are serious business right there. It can be a rich source for our story ideas. So Adam just told me this great quote from Keith Richards, how Keith Richards gets ideas for his songwriting. I prefer to think of myself as an antenna. There's only one song, and Adam and Eve wrote it, and the rest is a variation on a theme. I just thought that was so great. So beyond the generation of ideas and looking within to see what's in our hand, I thought hard about the motivation for some of my books, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about them, where the ideas came from. So stories are written to work through problems. So I've got two books here, Those Shoes and Happy Like Soccer. So with Those Shoes, I thought about what is something that deeply matters to me. And what is something I wanted as a kid? So as a kid, let's see if I got them here. I wanted these shoes really, really bad. They were from Starsky and Hutch. They were really expensive. My parents, I grew up in a big family, and we didn't have money for anything extra, anything that we didn't absolutely need. And I just remember 6th grade and all the kids coming to school in those shoes. So with that, I kind of tucked that little scene in my head away for a long time until a few events happened. And the first one was when I was student teaching. I was in a classroom where a kid had a pair of shoes fall apart, and he had to go to the guidance counselor and get a new pair of shoes. And he came back in wearing a pair of like shiny black church shoes kind of thing. And just that seeing the look on his face, seeing the other kids and what they did in response to him, I just had that little pang of like, oh, I kind of remember how he felt back then, or how I felt back then. And then years later, then I was working in volunteering in a clothes closet, and we had a little boy come in that needed a pair of shoes, and we found a brand new pair of shoes for him. He was wearing like water shoes that were 2 sizes too small. We found a new pair of shoes for him. So I thought, I think I can write this story about a kid who doesn't just want the shoes, he dreams about them, begs his grandma, and gets more and more desperate as the kids in his class come to school sporting the black shoes with the white stripes. But I also knew that I wanted this story to go beyond a kid's desire for the latest fad and into what it's like to sacrifice something precious for a friend. So that was Those Shoes. Happy Like Soccer is another example of a story that helped me work through a problem. So I coached soccer for several years with a team of volunteers in an under-resourced neighborhood. And Happy Like Soccer was written to capture 3 distinct memories of that time. The first memory involved a girl that we coached 2 years. Each week she'd hope that her mom would come to her games and cheer for her, but her mom always had to work. And then the second memory was watching another mother who walked 4 miles in flip-flops with a toddler and told to see her son playing soccer. And we never forgot that whole scene. And then the third was we decided to, instead of having the games all the way out at the Cedar Valley complex, we would have a game in the neighborhood. And we had tons of parents there and caregivers, and people were cheering for their kids, not just by the number, that's what I say in the book, but by their name. And that made a huge difference. That game was just a lovely experience. So these were both written to kind of work through a problem. Stories can also be written in response to the question, what if? So what is it about the question, what if, that unleashes our imagination, both for good things and not so good things like worry? Asking what if is most fruitful when a writer is relaxed and positive, open, and in no rush. What if ideas can be shy, transient, and slippery, and they often vanish when they're pressured to produce or perform. Somehow, I think what if ideas often come when when our body's engaged in something else. We're walking the dog, we're doing dishes, something like that. When the body's engaged, the mind frees up, and the antenna has a way of scanning. So I wrote this series of, there's more, I just didn't bring them, but these little books from Random House are little early readers for kids that are fractured fairy tales having a pet theme, having a dog or a cat theme. And I played with this idea for some time, trying to maintain kind of a light hand. And when they started to knit together, I followed their lead. Another what if catalyst was this book, A Bike Like Sergio's. This resulted from the what if question. What if a kid who wants something badly finds an unusually large sum of money? So think back on your own childhood. How many of you remember a time where you found money or some type of random treasure? Does everybody remember? We don't forget that. It's one of those things we just don't forget. I remember being a kid and finding 40 bucks on the street, and you had to know how I grew up. Like 40 bucks was a very big deal. But I can remember everything about that moment. So I thought, gosh, what happens when a kid finds some money? What does he do with it? So what's interesting about this story, though, when I talked about kids don't have to have a happy ending. So in this story, this boy sees a lady drop what he thinks is a dollar bill, and he's feeling grumpy, and he's feeling like he doesn't have a bike like his friend. And so he takes the dollar bill and he stuffs it in his pocket. And he goes home, and he's feeling a little guilty, but he pulls out the dollar bill and he unfolds it, and it's not 1 or 5 or 10 or 20, it's $100 bill. He's got to figure out what he's going to do. Is he going to is he going to tell his parents? Is he going to buy the bike like his friend has? Is he going to return it to the lady? What is he going to do? Well, at the end of the story, he ends up giving the money back to the lady, and he doesn't get his bike. It's his birthday and he doesn't get a bike. And kids want to know that he gets his bike. I have gotten so many letters about, they just come up to me and say, did he get his bike? Like, how come he didn't get it? Are you gonna write another book where he gets the bike? And so they even have written like this, Ruben's bike. They send me things like this where like, hey, this is how you should do it. This is him. This is him getting his dang bike. There he is, riding his bike. So I tend, sometimes my books have this little tension at the end, like those shoes, he doesn't get the shoes, Bike Like Sergio doesn't get the bike, but I try to tell kids that, doing the right thing makes you deep down happy. Getting the material thing might make you happy for a little bit, but the right thing gives you a deep down happiness. And we talk about what does it mean to be deep down happy, and they can do it, but they still deep down want to know that the kid gets the bike. So stories can also, another category is stories can be written to fill a perceived need. So we had lots of quality books. Adam, did we have lots of books growing up? A lot of books. Okay, but my youngest liked this 20-cent book from like the grocery store, Tommy's New Bed. It's the worst, but we read it a billion times, and that's the book he liked, and we read it until the cover fell off. We read it till he was way past needing a new bed, He went to kindergarten. In fact, but I showed him Tommy's New Bed recently, and I saw his face kind of soften just a little bit, like, yeah, I like that book. So books like this can be a huge help in a child's transition from one stage to another. So I wrote these books to fill a perceived need. It's a set of these little bunny books, and I'll tell you a little story about I was working with kindergartners, and I was showing them these books, and they said, where do you get your ideas, like kids often do? And I said, well, I had a child who had a problem with wetting the bed, and I had one who didn't want to share, and I had another one who had a hard time giving up a pacifier, and then another one who didn't want to go to preschool. And this kindergartner just has like this like confused look on his face, and then he just said, are all your kids rabbits or something? I mean, you can totally see why. You know, after I had a child who did this. Yeah. So yeah, so these I do like to write books that fill kind of the need that I perceive or other people tell me about. And another one of those was Kaya and the Bees. So I will show you, let's see. So Adam, as a little kid, was really into catching bees and studying them and releasing them and that. And we got into beekeeping, Adam and my husband and I. And we did that for several years. And I thought, oh, I think there's a book there, because when I talk to groups of kids, I'll say, you know, how many of you love bees, or how many of you are afraid of bees? And when I say afraid of bees, pretty much 98% of kids are terrified of bees. And so I thought, I've got to write a story about a little girl who whose dad becomes a beekeeper, and the dad has plans for this little girl to help. And there again, I have to do the thing where, you know, you could write a nice story where the girl gets to work the bees, be in her bee suit, not have anything bad happen, and then she just decides that bees are awesome and stuff. But instead, I had to make her get stung, and then she gets stung, and she decides she's never going to work the bees again, never going to go up on the roof with her dad and look at the bees. She hates bees. But then they go to harvest the honey, and they harvest the honey in her apartment, and the honey smells. I'll just read you that page. They're harvesting the honey, and she says, we work all day filling jars and mopping. There is honey on the floor, on the table, on my elbow, on the doorknobs. Who cares? We are laughing about the magic happening right in our kitchen. The honey flows, and I want to draw a picture, but no crayon is that golden, and you can't draw the smell of warm, sweet honey filling our apartment. So at the end of the story, she decides that while she's still afraid of bees, she might work the bees again, because the job bees do is a miracle, and what they produce is a miracle. So, but I like reading that book in schools, because kids have a lot of feelings about bees, and they can be scary, and they can sting. That's the reality. They can sting. So the chance to explore an interesting character can be another inspiration. So sometimes I meet kids or even an adult character, and I know I need to write about them. The tension that I face when the character is someone I know is giving them enough of a struggle and enough obstacles to muscle through. When I care about the characters, I can also get protective and too merciful with them and deny them the struggle that will help them change and grow. So the characters came first in this book, the P.S. Brothers. I met two young boys. They were cousins, best friends, and as they said, they were the savers of each other's lives. They told me they had saved each other's lives 5 times. They were scrappy, tough, hilarious, and I knew I needed to write about them. And about that same time, the youngest son was 10, and he wanted to buy a bike, and it cost $165, and he already had a bike. So we said, well, you're going to have to earn your own money here, and you're going to have to figure out a way to earn, you know, if you want that bike. So he decided that he would go around to the neighbors who had dogs, and he would start this little poop scooping business where he would charge per poop, and he had a scooper, he made these funny little flyers, sent them to all the neighbors, the phone started ringing, and that kid earned $165 in 6 weeks. And then he promptly shut the business down. He never wanted to do it ever again. And so I knew that there were so many funny little stories with that I knew it needed to work its way into a book. So I had characters, and I had this little business, and then I had something that I had been thinking about a lot related to dogs, and how I just think it's interesting to think about people who want a dog for protection or as an extension of identity. And I wondered, what if a couple kids who were accustomed to a certain degree of danger wanted a dog for protection rather than companionship? And what if the dog they wanted for protection actually became the dog they would come to protect? So I had my story. I had enough of a story to start writing, but it started completely with the main characters. Stories can be written to rework a memory. So The Purple Puffy Coat is my most recent book. And this story reworked a memory from, again, the youngest son, who was shy and quiet and liked to blend in. And when he was in first grade, I bought him a royal blue, huge puffy coat. I thought, and I bought it big because I wanted him to like grow into it. So this huge marshmallow man blue coat. And he wore it to school begrudgingly, and I thought he looked adorable in it. And he hated that coat. He came home one day and he's just like crying, wouldn't leave his room. I hate the coat. It finally came out. So anyway, the coat went to Goodwill, and I thought about, like, I had bought a coat for him that I liked, but I didn't think about what he liked and who he was. So I wanted to write a story about a friendship between two characters where one likes to blend in, one likes to be very showy. And one day I had Adam's oldest son, who was 4 years old, in the car, and he said, and I couldn't figure out characters. I could not figure out characters. And Leo said, Grandma, you should write a book about a stick bug and a beetle. So that's what I did. I thought that's perfect. Stick bugs have that way of blending in. Beetles can be iridescent and really flashy. And I thought, I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So it's really fun to take a memory and just rework it. That's one of my very favorite things to do. Now, stories can be written to try and capture a feeling. And I'll tell you about this category. So I have a news story that's just sold that began as a feeling. And this is my daughter and her husband, and they have 2 rescue dogs. One is a very confident, athletic, beautiful dog named Daisy, and the other is a nervous, neurotic Boston Terrier rescue who came from a puppy mill, whose one and only skill is cuddling. That's it. Can do nothing, is very nervous little dog. But during this pandemic, with homeschooling, working from home, and like these tumultuous times, the skill and what Rosie offers is solid gold. So I wrote what Rosie can do to try and capture the feeling of all the different ways that a dog can be heroic. So I'll read this to you really briefly. It's a short manuscript. So it goes like this. This is Rosie. Rosie can cuddle. And then this is Luna. You'll have to use your imagination. Luna lives at the zoo with a cheetah named Amara. When they first met, Luna was a puppy and Amara a cub, and soon they became best friends. Luna loves her job of keeping Amara calm and happy just by being her pal. And this is Rosie. Rosie can cuddle. Let's meet Pepper. He's smaller than the cows he herds, but he is mighty. Pepper keeps his eyes fixed on the rancher. With a word or a hand sign, Pepper explodes, zipping and yipping. You've met Rosie. Rosie can cuddle. Check out Lucky. Like all dogs, Lucky has a super-powered nose with 300 million olfactory receptors. Humans have 6 million. Lucky has been trained to track the scent of endangered animals. Great job, Lucky. Now, back to Rosie. Rosie can cuddle. Introducing Tanya. Tanya competes at agility, crawling through tunnels, weaving around poles, jumping over bars, and even running up a seesaw. At every competition, Tanya is a champion. Rosie is the champion too at cuddling. And here's a hero, Jax. Jax is a lifeguard dog who works with human lifeguards. If someone needs rescuing, Jax can jump out of a speedboat or even a helicopter to save them. Astonishing. Rosie can jump onto someone's lap for a cuddle. Recognized Scout, he acts in movies, TV shows, and commercials. When he's out for a walk with his trainer, people say, "Hey, I know that dog. Smile, Scout." Rosie is always smiling when she is cuddling. Kit's work is her play. She chases away birds and other animals on the airport runway so planes can take off and land safely. Kit protects the passengers and the wildlife. Wow, Kit, Scout, Jax, Tanya, Lucky, Pepper, and Luna are spectacular dogs. And so is Rosie. Because every morning Rosie wakes up and does a job she gave herself, cuddling everyone in her family. On Sundays, though, she goes for a ride in the car wearing a special vest, so like a therapy dog vest, and she cuddles a child in the hospital and cuddles an elderly person in the nursing home and cuddles some more at a disaster scene. Because when someone has a fearful heart or a lonely heart or a heart that just plain hurts, it is exactly what Rosie offers that makes a heart feel braver, stronger, and less alone. Because Rosie can cuddle, and cuddling, just like every gift a dog gives, is spectacular too. Wow. Thank you. And then stories can be written as a thank you. So appreciation is another source of inspiration. When I was 5 years old, I used to walk with a mailman to the houses on our street, and I held open the mailbox lid. So my first book was Grace and Joe, about a little girl in a mail carrier. And shortly thereafter, I still walked to school every day, and I always cut through the neighborhood fire station to talk to the firefighters. So firefighters were such nice guys, and as I got a little older, I thought that, well, maybe one day I'd like to marry a firefighter or a mailman, you know. Fast forwarding a few decades, my husband became indeed a firefighter, and he also took a part-time job delivering the mail. So that was like 2 birds with 1 stone. And I wrote both Grace and Joe and the Firefighters Thanksgiving as a thank you to public servants who fight our fires and deliver our mail. So with a 30-year career, I've written through every kind of circumstance, but with the loss of my beloved husband to brain cancer a few years ago, the reasons for writing abruptly changed. I wrote, but not for children. I wrote, but not for publication. I wrote to make sense, to remember, and to survive. And I wrote to somehow tether myself in a world where I was free floating and where I suddenly did not recognize my life at all, with the hope that one day I could be strong enough for my kids and grandkids who miss their dad and grandpa. And though I couldn't imagine it, I carried that hope that I'd be both lighthearted and stout-hearted enough to one day write again for kids. Curiosity, as I mentioned before, that bellwether of well-being, vanished, and I prayed it would return. So life has a way, we all know this, of contracting, then expanding, with sorrows, with joys, with dark wilderness and brilliant clearings. And though I'm forever changed, I am entering a new time of expansion, as evidenced in dog form. So that's dog form. And I'm rediscovering that my Keith Richards antenna still does exist. So if you are in a time of contracting, a time when your old writing rooms no longer feel like home, take heart and just keep going. Write what's in your hand, write whatever that antenna of yours is picking up, even if the language is completely unfamiliar to you. To quote Hamilton, write your way out. You may pitch every dang word of it. You may ask, what was I thinking, when your future self reads what you wrote. But as Anne Lamott says, all writing feeds the stream. It does. I believe that with all my heart. So right through it all, the contraction and expansion and the wilderness and the clearing, just keep writing. So in summary, you can mind your own life for ideas for children's books, and we can think about what we know, remember, and imagine, and what we want to find out. We can write to work through a problem, fill a perceived need, explore characters, capture a feeling, relive a memory, or thank somebody. And you're going to add your own reasons too. And I'd like to close with this quote, and it's perhaps the most important why of all. What I've discovered is that each time you look at the world and the people in it closely, imaginatively, the effort changes you. The world under your microscope of your attention opens up like a beautiful, strange flower, and it gives itself back to you in ways you could never imagine. What stories are hiding behind the faces of the people who you walk past every day? What love and what hopes? So this effort of looking at the world and the people in it, that act and that effort changes you somehow. And the stories are out there, they're out there and in here, and they're more than enough for everyone. It's been an honor to talk to you tonight.
I'm trying to catch both
Yeah.
cameras there. So I want to just let everyone know if you have any questions. I think we got a little bit of time, and I know I will say there's one right here on the chat, so I'm going to read it.
Okay.
It's from Grant Tracy. He says, I like how you write in part for working people, a mom who can't attend soccer games because she has to work, a girl who lives in an apartment, not a house, a kid who can't buy expensive shoes, a kid who can't get a fancy bicycle. I wonder if you might talk about writing for that working class demographic.
Well, I really believe that children need diverse books for sure, but I think socioeconomic diversity is important too. I'm pretty passionate about that. I just think we need all kinds of stories. So it's something that I'm familiar with growing up, and I'm interested in now. Yeah. I also thought, if you don't have another question there, I thought I might do kind of my most frequently asked questions. I've answered them kind of here if you're curious about that. We can talk a little bit about, and then Jim, you can just interrupt me if a question pops up. Okay, so publishers and agents. My books are published by mainstream houses, and I have an agent who shops my manuscripts around and negotiates contracts and things like that. So what's changed in children's books is the fact that agents are almost a necessity these days. It used to be like when I first started that you could just submit manuscripts to publishers, and you might end up in a big slush pile, but you would probably get read. And nowadays it's almost imperative that you have an agent. So that's something that's changed. Illustrators, picture books illustrators are hired by the publisher unless the author is also the illustrator, which would be awesome, but I cannot draw at all. And sometimes I have a little bit of say in the matter of, like they'll ask me sometimes, who would you like for an illustrator, or who could you envision? And so I might give them a list of like 10 names, and then they've never chosen anybody that I've ever suggested, but they do ask me that. And then while a picture book is getting worked on, I will get sketches from the illustrator, and I can weigh in a little bit if there's something. I'm really careful about that though, and I only do it if I really feel I must, because I feel like the illustrator needs the same level of freedom in interpreting the words as I felt when I created the story. So I'd love to see what illustrators have to do with the art and, with their interpretation of the story, and I've been really pleased. So if you do write a picture book, you'll want to resist the urge to direct the illustration at all, like in your cover letter or in the manuscript itself. Let the art director and the editor, they know how to read the stories and visualize visualize what the visuals could look like. Word count, that's kind of an interesting thing. So picture books, I used to have about 1,000 words to work with. Now they really like a picture book manuscript to be between about 600 and 750 words. In general, the spare the text, the better, but there's exceptions for that, especially for picture books that are for older children. And when you submit a picture book manuscript, it's just typed pages. You don't have to do any kind of blocking or, layout or anything like that. Just a typed manuscript. They know how to read it and see it as a picture book. Submissions. This is where I like how things are better now than I did before. Submissions used to be all through the mail, and now pretty much everything is electronic. I don't think there's any manuscript in my world at all submitted paper, so it's all electronic. But there's this new trend where, and I don't know, Jim, if you've experienced this, but or anybody else who's had published stuff, there's this new trend where publishers won't respond at all. They'll only respond if they're interested. So you might wait, a good long while, a year, 2 years, and then who knows how long that is. So that can be kind of frustrating. So sometimes it's really quick because it's an electronic submission, but other times it can be just a very long wait. Waiting, it can take about 4 to 5 years for an accepted picture book manuscript to be published. So good illustrators are booked up often in advance, years in advance, and a publisher has to find room on the list and things like that. So I think the shortest time period was probably the Purple Puffy Code, and that was maybe 2.5 years. And the longest was that Firefighters Thanksgiving, which was almost 5 years between when it was accepted and when it was published. And then sometimes people ask me, like, what is hot, like what is selling right now? And I think that's really hard to say, but funny is always good. If you can write funny, that's big. And funny early readers and middle grades are always really, really popular.
Any other questions? And then I just repeat, just so you know.
Okay. Those dogs, what kind of dogs are they?
They are German wire hairs, 3 German wire hairs.
I have a Griffon.
Oh, you do? Oh, it is the same kind of family, yeah,
That's what.
cousins, yeah.
Yeah.
Long ago, I was always taught that you wanted to learn about something, any topic, get a children's book first.
Ah,
read that.
interesting,
And you
yeah,
get the real answer in straightforward language.
sure.
And I hearing you speak out, I kind of also was thinking that a lot of these children's stories have themes and that are kind of easily identifiable in the adult world also.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. It kind of goes back to that. They have feelings that are not diluted. They have the same feelings. They live in the same world that we do. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
Even really difficult times, how do you maintain a sense of joy in your life?
Can you repeat the question?
What's that?
Can you just repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So in these difficult times, how do you maintain a sense of joy in your writing? That's a great question. I think we all feel that, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't write for kids when I was grieving, because I was so afraid some of that would, eke out into a story for them, and I didn't want to do that. So I think play, we have to, as grownups, as writers, we have to play. We have to be curious about things. We've got to learn new things. I think being physical, I think really watching the input, like I had to really turn off the news. I really limit news and, don't watch scary things, like I really kind of try to protect and that sense of of joy, because I agree, it's fragile right now, isn't it? It really is. So, yeah, I think protect it, do those things that make you happy, you know, and do them often, do them regularly, you know.
We'll have to, I think that sounds like the perfect note to end on tonight. So I want to thank you so much. Thanks for everyone that's here tonight. Thanks to all of you on Zoom.